My clock's showing 4:35, so let's get started real quick. Um, Dave, do you have anything that you want to say to start us off?
Just from my perspective, I'm really excited that we're able to actually do this. It came together on the fly, but thankfully, like I said in the email that I sent out today with the link, the people who are going to be leading us through this have done this before a few years back. So it's not like they're inventing something brand new as we go. It's been tried, tested, and true. And you're going to learn from some excellent folks tonight. And then as far as getting this into your learning management platforms and available to your students, that's where Becky, Roy, and I will step in, and we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on tonight and show you some examples as we go. So I'm excited for this, and on behalf of Becky, Roy, and myself, I'd like to once again thank Andrea, Sharon, Carol, and Phil for summoning this from the ether. Our Dungeons and Dragons campaign is rolling a 1d20 right now for academic hangover damage, getting this set up, but it's looking like a good roll. So there we go.
And for those of you who aren't from Dave's region, Dave is at Wexford Misaki ISD and also is part of the Northern Michigan Learning Consortium. So that's Dave. You'll get to know him as we go.
I suppose I could have introduced myself, but I was just so excited to get started. So.
I know, I am too. So I'm Rebecca Bush from Ottawa Area ISD, and that's all you need to know. And let's turn it over to Phil, because I know that we've got a jam-packed agenda and we want to give everybody their equal time. So Dr. Gershmel, would you like to take it away and lead us?
I actually have about 12 minutes here in 5 little pieces, each of which is a kind of a guide to how to do good geography semi-remotely. So we start out with a wake-up call about visual learning, because we're going to rely more on visual, and we need to know how it actually works. It doesn't work as well as some of the people say. That's partly due to something called the Matthew effect, about how kids learn. And buried underneath all of this is some neuroscience about how brains remember maps. I'll use an example from the news today to illustrate the importance of the idea of a big idea, which permeates a lot of what they've done with the GIANTS program. And then talk a little bit about how it fits in the K-8 scaffold. So a wake-up call is about the myth of visual learning. Geography teachers use a lot of photos or videos to teach basic visual vocabulary. It's background for the key idea of geography, that many aspects of life are influenced by where you are. I'll tell you what happened to me in a real class that I was teaching a few years back. The topic was about environments in Africa, and I showed them a picture of a rainforest. Somehow I wound up with something sitting right on top of my words there. Rainforest has lots of rain. It's got some big trees. People who live in rainforest tend to build their houses out of wood. And this is what a desert looks like, kids. The desert doesn't have much rain. And there is a basic science fact. Trees do need water to grow. So what do you use to build here? Houses in deserts are often made out of mud or stone. The principle is very simple. How you live, what you wear, what you build, how you have fun, is often influenced by where you live. In other words, geography is, in one sense, the science of the so totally obvious. What makes it challenging, what makes it important, is what's obvious in Michigan is not obvious in Mongolia, or Malawi, or even Midtown Manhattan. That's why we use a lot of pictures to build visual vocabulary. And especially we try to ask good questions about them. But unless we link these images to a map, students will not learn where they are. And the problem here is obvious. Maps are more abstract than photos. Here comes the wake-up call. This is a typical textbook map about the regions of Africa. You'll see it a few more times today, right, Sharon? Um, and I had it down in the corner when I was talking to my class a while back, telling them where the rainforest was. And then at the end of the class, I did a little debrief. I said the rainforest was here and the desert was here and the savanna was here and so on around Africa. I told the kids, you need to study the pattern of environments on this map. And here's where you can download it. And then a couple days later, after the Thanksgiving break, I gave them a pop quiz. The pop quiz was very simple. Here's a blank map, divided into 3 to 6 regions, and write a short phrase. These are some of their answers. And what I did was rescan them and colored them the colors of the original study map. Now, you guys have that map in your short-term memory yet. So you might find it a little bit hard to believe that all 5 of these kids turned the driest and biggest desert in the world into a farming region in their minds. They all moved the rainforest all over Africa. One of them eliminated it completely. It just took the forest out of Africa. That leads me to this huge fact. Human brains do not store visual images, map images accurately. And these students did not learn how to study maps in school. Now, if this is your mental map of Africa, there's no way that you can understand malaria or desertification or refugees, Somali pirates or Ebola or any of the other issues about Africa. The conclusion is you can't just say study this map. And this is even harder when you're doing it remotely, where they've got the map at home. You've got to teach the skills or model the inquiry or both. And Giants is very carefully designed to do exactly that. That leads me to this thing called the Matthew effect. It's named the Matthew effect. Well, first of all, it's really popular in recent research about reading. This is a review of educational research from about 5 years ago, and it reports 78 separate studies from 11 countries around the world. The words come from Matthew's parable of the talents. To all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. Those who have little, what they have will be taken away. The concept of the Matthew effect, I'm quoting from this article, is about the parable of the talents. It describes a model of cumulative advantage in which students who score high on a pretest tend to gain more from a class lesson. In other words, an initial advantage tends to beget further advantages. Like I said, there's a lot of research about this in Read It, in Learning Disabilities, the Journal of Education, Reading Improvement, Reading and Writing Quarterly. I put together a page of the 15 most common useful articles about this, and I'll put this up on the website for you guys to download, just in case you're in a debate with some of the people in your school who want to take minutes away from social studies in order to improve reading. You might want to just very diplomatically hand them this list and ask them a simple question. Would they please show you the research that backs up their opinion? I can talk more about this later on. I do want to point out that there is some research within geography, research in geographic education, about how to reverse the Matthew effect in map reading, and Giants does that. The third thing, and I'll apologize because some of you might have seen a little bit of this, but Dave said I should start this out by saying, if you want to understand how kids see a map, you have to understand a little bit about how human brains encode visual information. And the spoiler alert is we do it in several different ways. So here's a map of a room. It's got 9 identical books on 9 identical tables, except they've got different colors. Okay, here's the door going into this room. And I hid a $50 bill underneath that book right there. And this is you. And I got a simple question for you. How are you going to remember where this is? Because I'm not going to tell you right now. In fact, we're going to wait till way after everybody's talked to come back to this. Dave said I should split this in half, and I'm going to try it out and see how it works. How are you going to remember where that is? In the meantime, I have a 4-minute look at a hurricane to say why it's important to have a mental map inside your head. So at first, they predicted this hurricane would hit near Mobile. Then they said it would hit New Orleans. A little bit later on, they said it would arc across the Gulf here, and they would hit Southwest Louisiana. This could be big trouble. Now it's going to go across some of the warmest ocean water ever recorded. Now, this heat has been accumulating for many years. By the time it landed, hurricane had intensified rapidly and was a unique Category 4 storm, first one in the Gulf for a long time. The TV and the papers were saying how terrible this is. And I'm thinking how lucky we are. Because I'm a geographer and I have a rough mental map of population density. And I know population density is important. It's one of the first 2 lessons in Giants. I also know where to find a detailed map when I need one, and that map shows that in the entire Gulf Coast, all the way from Texas to Florida, there are only 2 counties that have fewer than 10 people per square mile, and the hurricane went right in on one of them. If it had been 60 miles to the west, it would have hit the petrochemical complex. That would have been a multi-billion-dollar disaster. 120 miles east, there's 250,000 people living on the shore. But where it actually hit, it's 2,600 miles of nearly empty marsh. Lake Charles is 35 miles inland, which pretty well eliminates the storm surge. And the biggest town on the coast is Cameron. 1 street wide. There's downtown. It has 1 store, 1 house out in the suburbs. Now, this isn't a lesson about hurricanes. It's a quick example of why population density is important. I'm also hinting a little bit about the skill of map reading. One of the problems we have in Michigan is that a couple of years ago, we were in the middle of an unusually cold patch, and people didn't learn from a map like this. They just remembered it was cold here, and therefore global warming must be some kind of a hoax or whatever. 6th grade Giants looks at issues like this by identifying a very small list of big ideas like latitude, resources, culture, elevation, regions, and population density. This is a consensus list. It was developed by the Association of American Geographers back in the 90s. The Giants curriculum teaches each big idea by using examples from a world region where its effects are important, like latitude in Africa. And all of our maps come from a resource called a clickable map. We can click on a button and we get the empire capitals. And then we come over here and we click on a button and we get the equator on here. Or we come over here and click on a button and get the mountains. In other words, you can build a map to do some kinds of inquiry by looking at this. And then clear the map off. I'll say more about how to access and use the maps after we've looked at some Giants lessons. That leads me to my last point, which has 1 frame. 6th grade Giants has a very specific role in a carefully designed K-8 scaffold of map skills and geographic ideas. This scaffold shows the skills and ideas needed to meet the clicks at each grade. So, a wake-up call: brains don't automatically remember maps. Those who read maps well can learn more from maps. Brains process visual image through multiple networks. This is just an example of a big idea and its effects. And 6th grade Giants is designed to do specific jobs within a bigger curriculum, as well as be a good course all by itself. So later on, I'll say more about how brains remember things, how to access these maps, how these are scaffolded, and if you want more about research, I'd be happy to oblige. Okay, so we're going to decide where to live 3,000 years ago. why people are making decisions have to pay attention to geographic conditions and connections. And right away, I've got a chance to say something about our PowerPoints. They're all too long. Some people don't want to talk about decisions and paying attention right now, and they'll just delete this frame. But it's a lot easier to delete a frame than it is for you to create the frame if you did want to have this here. So the place you're about to investigate is a real place at a real time in history. It's a long time ago. People used horses, wagons, hand tools. You don't have a cell phone. You might try to figure out where in the world this is, but the big question is, how do people decide where to live, where to build a fort, where to make a living, how to start a country, how to build a mall, where to do these things? So as we go on, you're supposed to be thinking about how you're making a decision, not just what decision you're making. So here are 8 places where you might choose to live. Which one would you pick? We will give kids a worksheet that they can download, they can print. It works in black and white as well as in color. And they can write on the map. One of the things you probably want to do with remote kids is have them hold up their map once in a while, and you can look at it and see what kinds of notes they're taking, how they're doing. The letters are places where you might choose to live. Let's discuss it, let's vote. And you could stop the PowerPoint right here. I have it all put together as a single PowerPoint, but I think the Giants people, you broke it up, right? Yep. So asking people to vote after looking at a simple map exposes a really big problem with democracy. And this gives you a lever to go into some of the civics cliques to talk a little bit about the advantage of a democracy, of course, is people get to choose. The disadvantage is you need some good information to make a good decision. So what else would you like to know? You probably want to ask the kids to write down at least 3 things you'd like to know about this area. This will give you an idea what their notions are about causality, cause and effect in geography. Do they think of geography as only being mountains and rivers and plains, or do they think of it as including climate and hurricanes, or maybe including trade networks and things like that? In other words, ask them to write down what they know.
Or you may not get anything. They won't have an idea.
Or you won't get anything, in which case that is very useful information for you. The PowerPoint goes into a somewhat long discussion about the difference between location conditions, what's right there in a particular place, the little town of Cameron. These are the physical and human conditions that are at that place, and there's a variety of things that could be put up. The other half of the idea of location is the notion of connections with other places. And again, these usually involve the movements of something. Even today, we're connected by the movement of some electrons that are carrying, I hope, useful information for you guys. And there's a variety of ways in which places can be connected. The PowerPoint includes a quick quiz. It pops up a word and it asks them, is this a condition or a connection? And then it tells you. And then we get to something that might be a little bit more puzzling. Because is a river really a condition or is it really a connection? It's a condition if you use it for drinking water. It's a connection if you put a boat on it and float down somewhere else. So a river can actually have 2 jobs. And then we start adding information. You might want to know about the size of this area. How big is it? So there's Michigan at the same size. The middle of the area is just a little bit warmer than Michigan is. Now, because they might not have any really good reasons for picking any one of these places with almost no information like this, we give some examples that people came up with at other classes. It's far away, it's safe from attack. It's in the middle, it controls an area. It's on a peninsula. It's a little easier to defend it. It's in a bay. It's safe from bad winds. Or maybe you prefer another place. If so, what's your reason? And then, one at a time, the game just adds more information. Here's the rivers. What are they good for? We've already talked about that a little bit. Did that make you change your mind? Here's some mountains. Did that make you change your mind? Here's a place where it's too dry to grow any food. Did that make you change your mind? Here's a place where after many years we figured out this was the good cropland. Did that change your mind? Or if we're not talking about positive resources, here's a negative resource. This is low land that often floods. Did that change your mind? I mean, these floods killed millions of people. Now, this kind of game was really pretty common, but they were often done with an imaginary place. So even the Oakland County curriculum has got an imaginary game like this, you know, that we're going to locate these things. We thought the game is fun all by itself, but the real payoff comes when you say, aha, this is really a real place in the world. You know where it is? Well, here's one hint. There were lots of different kinds of people lived here. And then I'm basically using this hint as a way to define three things: subsistence farming, nomadic herding, hunting. Did that help? How about this one? The people that were farmers on the floodplain built walls to protect themselves from the nomads that lived on the grassland and the cattle raisers. Did that change your mind? Well, okay, let's just turn your map sideways and you find out that this map shows a fairly large area in eastern China. All of the letters represent real places. It's got a little background fact here. When you see a dark blue color like this on one of my PowerPoints, it usually means a note just for the teacher that you probably want to erase before you talk to kids, but it'll give you some little idea how to pronounce things. And then it goes around. It says, this place A is called Three Gorges, and it'll have a little picture about it. Now, this has a lot more information than you want them to try to learn. So what it does is it identifies with a blue color bold the things that they really might want to pay attention to. You know, the Yangtze River is the biggest river in China. Three Gorges Dam is one of the biggest rivers in the world. It's also got a clue down in the corner that if you want to stretch this out and make a research thing out of it, this is a good research project for kids. And so on. It kind of goes around these different places. I'm going to stop on this one for just a second because here we're stuck out on the peninsula like this, but because it was on a peninsula, Germany had claimed this as a colony back in the 1890s. Japan captured it in 1938, and it was one of their main military bases. So we're giving them a word that might be useful in 7th grade when they start talking about the history, especially. But it's more important even than that. This is the 7th largest port in the world, 3 times as big as New York. Actually, there are 3 other ports in China that are even bigger than this one. And so on. The last one is out in Mongolia. And again, it's got a little add to it to tie it into current events here. Place C is near nearly all of the rare earth mines of the world. And you need rare earths in order to make just about everything that we use in our houses these days, from computers, televisions, microwaves, electric car, cell phones. These things are really important. China rules them. It's a part of the economic geography of the place that you just kind of slip into the back of the kid's mind. So that's a quick overview of that game.
Okay, and I was just going to show what I did with it for my 6th graders that I'm teaching online this year. So I have a remote social studies class. And the PowerPoint that Phil showed us, Giants has broken it up into 3 different parts. And it is, we kind of chunk it out. So whether it's someone in the classroom, a teacher in the classroom, showing it to their students, they have it broken up into smaller, easier amounts of information. And it also builds up that sense of curiosity and inquiry as well. With me teaching remotely, I've been able to push it out through Google Classroom. So I'm not sure if I can share my screen. Can you see my Google Classroom now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so basically what I did was, and I would be doing this also if I was teaching in a building this year, because I just wanted to see how this works digitally, because we've spent a lot of time on it. So I've organized my Google Classroom assignments in that under classwork, and I've organized it by weeks. The top here is next week, so I've already started adding information to it. And that will, that's not visible by students yet because it's ready to post next Monday, or, this coming Monday. But for example, the PowerPoint that Phil just took us through, that one I made a copy of, and then I pushed it out as a Google slide projection. And I embedded a poll in there, a Google form. So I'm just going to skip down to that. The question was, how to decide when you really don't have any information, how do you decide where you think would be a good place to live, or, to create your village or whatever. And so the next slide, it says vote, doesn't come up very well, but it's actually a hot link. And I had the kids go in, and it's a Google form. And so I've already got 27 responses where kids had to determine which of those locations they preferred and explain why. So that's one way that I was controlling how much information they get. And then they would also, when they get into it next week, they're going to get part 2 of the presentation that refers to conditions and connections. They're going to have an activity to put into their digital notebook. And then part 3 is the final part of the presentation, where they do find, they start to see those slides about where the rivers and the mountains are and the good cropland and so forth. Here is, when they're done with that last part of the presentation, this is where they would add this page digitally to their digital notebook. And when they do that, I push it out as a Google slide to them, and it allows them to add information. So they can include a text box, and they would be able to type in which location they preferred, and then they can explain why. There's what was their first choice, what was their final choice, and they can add all that information in to their notebook. So if I was in the classroom, I could print this page out and give it to them, and they could glue it into a spiral notebook. But because we're working digitally and remotely, they will have their own notebook. So I have it, I have a notebook, an example of a notebook here, and these are the conditions and connections, and then the next page would be that page that I just showed you with we're deciding where to live. So that's kind of how we took Phil's game and tried to still make it inquisitive to our students and giving them a chance to make some decisions and have to justify their point of view, and then also keep a record of this information in their digital notebook.
I am showing you what Phil and Andrea showed you was step 1. I'm skipping ahead now to step 4, one of the other really critical elements of our first lesson. We always put at the top of a PowerPoint what step you're on to connect you back to the teacher's guide. And instead of asking about like the game in general, what place would you put a city where you wanted to live, we're going to look at actual history of the world, and we're going to say, where did people build the earliest great cities? Because what we want to get to is, why did they put the largest cities, the largest ancient cities in those particular places? And just to lend some notion of what a big deal ancient cities were, we have more than 2,000 years ago, in 600 BCE, Nimrod. These are in Mesopotamia, in the Middle East, the cities that I'm showing you, actual unburying of the city from the sands, and then a painting of the city. Or, not quite as long, but still more than 2,000 years ago, there was Babylon in Mesopotamia. And you can see the walls, which are more than 2,500 years old, or about that, look really old. And just to give you a notion of how high and how thick the walls are, can you see the person in this old photo? Here is the recreation, the rebuilding, the restoration of part of Babylon's ancient wall to show you how spectacular an ancient city, at least its walls, could be. Okay, where were the ancient cities? And that's the next slide. Babylon is right here in Mesopotamia, close to where Europe and Asia and Africa meet. And my question about all of those stars that show the top 12 largest cities more than 2,000 years ago is, are they scattered kind of evenly throughout the world? Are they in every continent? Do you see some clumps of cities? Are any of the cities sort of in a line? And what we're going to do is use one of the major vocabulary words, but it's more than a vocabulary word. It's a really important tool. The word region is something you do. It's not something you memorize. And what we're going to ask you to do is look at those red symbols that show the ancient cities and ask you, do you see groups of symbols where symbols are close together? Do you see some groups? Well, what we're going to do is kind of draw a rectangle around those groups, and there they are. I found a couple groups. It's interesting that we do have one symbol in what is presently India, where it looks like the symbol's all by itself, but it sort of is in a line with all of those other two groups. Another important question we could ask, I think you can see the red line that is the equator on this map. But what we'd like you to notice is another special line of latitude. These aren't just something that we make kids memorize. Notice how close many of those ancient large cities are to what we call the Tropic of Cancer. If we come a little bit closer in time, but still almost 2,000 years ago, This is not the same time period. This is about 500 years after what we were looking at. And can you see the purple symbols that show the largest 12 cities? And where are they? Could you find regions? A region being a group of symbols that are alike and very close together. And here, if we draw boxes again, and notice how close those groups, those regions of ancient cities are, again, to the Tropic of Cancer. And we're going, why? Why is this? I have a big why. Why there? And what we're going to turn to, and what Andrea will help demonstrate that the kids will use, is a map that looks like this. And what are all those numbers? They're kind of small. Can you see them okay? There are a lot of numbers. I have circled a number here in Africa, and it says 85. It happens to be in the country of Sudan. I've circled with blue a temperature of average annual temperature of 44. So we have 44 in Minnesota, which is close to Michigan. We have 85 in Sudan, Africa. And it's like, oh my, those are two very different places. One is generally, if you take the average temperatures for the whole year, one is a lot warmer. We chose those two places to show you because Sharon is going to describe a wonderful literature connection that has a young African refugee who moves from this very warm Sudan, flies in a plane, and lands in January in Minnesota. And you can sort of imagine the shock. Okay, very different temperatures. We're going to use these temperatures to see whether this might help us understand why the ancient cities are where they are. So here we go. What we've done, and this is something called a clickable map, and Phil will show you more about clickable maps later on. They're available to the students. They're very easy to get at virtually. Dave was highly instrumental in getting these to be clickable. But what I did is I clicked on a layer to show all temperatures that are 76, average annual temperatures that are 76 or higher. So notice we have that very warm place in Sudan I've circled with red. And where are these warmest temperatures? And what we'd like the students to notice is how close they are to the equator. These are the warmest places in the world. The coldest places in the world, and that includes that Minnesota temperature and others. Where are the coldest temperatures in relationship to the equator? Well, they certainly are not close to the equator. They're a lot farther away, except for one that's in some very high mountains. When I was teaching high school students in New York City, this was a complete revelation to them. They had no concept, mostly had no concept that as you move away from the equator, what happens to temperatures? You can go north of the equator, you can go south of the equator. Now, going south of the equator, we don't have much land as far south as we have land that is north of the equator. But looking north of the equator, we really see this warm to cold. Can you imagine an average annual temperature of 4 degrees? Oh, I would not like to live in Siberia. Remember how we found regions before? We could circle the close together temperatures that are alike, that are really cold. We could circle, make regions for the temperatures that are really warm. But so you have farther away from the equator, the colder temperatures, closer to the equator, the warmer temperatures. Do you remember where the ancient cities were? If we look at ancient cities in 3 different time periods, they basically, with 1 or 2 exceptions, fall within this box. And how would you describe, they're not in the coldest, generally. They're mostly not in the hottest temperatures. They're kind of in between the coldest and the hottest. And it's like, why did ancient peoples do that? They're in between the coldest and hottest temperatures. Well, imagine, and it's really hard for us to do, imagining 2,000 years ago, but why might the coldest places be a problem 2,000 years ago? Why might the warmest places be a problem? Oops, I spelled ancient wrong. Ancient cities did not have technology like today, whether it's for farming, raising food, whether it's for heating the building you're living in. They certainly didn't have air conditioning. I'm going to have Andrea help with the activity where students could then follow up. Having looked at this presentation, they follow it up with an activity. And she has a couple different things I think that we can do. So I think we can go to Andrea sharing.
Okay, and I'm going to share what I use, and I've used it in the classroom, and then I'm also doing it virtually now. But this is my screen. This is a map, a work map for the students, and it has all the temperatures on it. One of the slides that was in Carol's presentation. So as I've done it in the classroom in the past, I've handed this out, and as we worked through and we got to that slide in the PowerPoint about temperatures, and so students can start to recognize where the colder temperatures are and the warmer temperatures, and they recognize this band of warmer temperatures around the equator and in between the tropics, and that to help reinforce that that information, that big idea about temperature. So I had to figure out how I was going to, and when we usually use colored pencils and a paper map, and then they would glue it into their spiral notebook. So this year I had to figure out how this is going to work differently, and because the activity itself I felt was very important for the students to reinforce that concept of temperature. So we made a Google slide, and all I did was take it right off of the Giants website, the map, and then I made it into a Google slide, and then I would push this out into Google Classroom to my students, and I assign it as a digital notebook page /slide, and then give them the directions with the color key to identify or highlight the colder temperatures with blue and the warmer temperatures with red. So it's starting to look very similar to what Carol did. So to get these little boxes, all I did was I did a text box and estimated about the size of what it would be to go around one of those little temperature icons there. And I'm going to make it a little bit thicker, and I wanted to turn it into blue to identify blue, and then I can just click and drag that and put it over the temperature, and I'm going to click on it again, make a copy, make a copy, and I'll paste it down here, and now I'm just going to drag it out of the way. I'm going to turn it to red, and then I will put it around one of the warmer temperatures. So the student that is working on this digitally, and it could be students in a classroom that are working on this on their device, or in my case, my students are all working remotely from home. They still have that opportunity to go through and take time to build that skill. Not only are they working with it digitally, but then it's reinforcing where they start to see that band develop of the warmer temperatures that hover around the equator, and it brings them back to this goal of considering what are the conditions in the environment, in the location where we see not only where major cities are today, but where major cities were thousands of years ago. And again, they start to recognize and make connections with the past, those ancient cities, and then with what we see in our world today. So that was another example. And then they put it into their digital notebook. And that's it from me.
Okay.
Carol, I think Sharon's up next.
I'm up. So I'm going to take you into our actual document. And, okay, are we there?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. All right, so when you go in, if you have not been in Giants yet, this is what you're going to see. It will tell you you are in Unit 1, Lesson 1. So all of the things that have been done up till this point are in this lesson. Also, you'll notice that we have information about the interactive notebook and the digital notebook. And we talk about journaling, and we're condensing things tonight because of the timestamp. So we know as teachers, there are things that have to be covered. Sometimes we don't have the time to create everything. So we have taken the time to do as much of the base work for you. So I'm going to take you into Quizlet. If you haven't used Quizlet, Quizlet is another tool for students to learn from. So what has happened is we have, I'm going to take you into it. The link will take you into Quizlet, so you don't have to worry about if you don't have a subscription or your school doesn't. It's already there for you. Your terms are there, and so we're on the mode where they're showing you the definition, and if you click a second time, it will tell you the vocabulary word that they're talking about. When I was teaching Unit 1, I would assign the vocabulary right at the beginning of the unit. The students can go in and start working with the words and the definitions. They can go out of the example with definitions and words, and they can go in with or without pictures. So we initially made it all with pictures so that the students could see what they were looking at, because often they're looking at vocabulary words that they don't know what they are. When they're in here, there's also different options for them to do. So they can put up the vocabulary cards and they can start matching the vocabulary term to the definition. And initially, you can see on the left side, the time is just clicking because, you know, they're trying to figure out what goes together. By the end of the unit, the students have practiced so much that they're actually competing against each other, trying to get that lowest time stamp. They can play a matching game. They can just study. There is also a format that they can play a video game trying to spell the word or define it before it hits the bottom. So the kids really get into this. My students alone went up 35% by when I added Quizlet to social studies. So their vocabulary skills went up 35% overall. They started using the vocabulary terms during our lessons, which I highly encouraged when I was in it. You know, when we were talking, we didn't talk about, well, they would just take the road. It was like, well, the connection they would take, and then we would talk about it, so that vocabulary built and built. So, you know, Carol was talking about regions earlier. Initially, they have a general idea of what a region is, but we use it so much, we focus on it all through our units, that it becomes just part of their speech when they're in social studies class. So along with the pictures, or the words with pictures and without, we also have the ability for students to, I don't know what I just did there. We have made static cards for those students who need the physical, and they can print them and, you know, test in what we would consider more of the, you know, old-fashioned matter maybe. But a lot of the students will do this. Their parents will print them. I had a few students that would ask me to print them, but it gives them that other option. I also had students who like to play memory with those. So Quizlet is available to you in every unit, every lesson. So I have, we've established the word, the definition, and a picture. If you are a teacher who encourages them write sentences using the vocabulary terms, that's something you can add to the curriculum. You're not held to just what we have. There'll be other lessons that you'll want to insert. Carol, did you want me to go right into literature? Okay. So along with the vocabulary in each section, if you continue down, you'll see formative and summative assessments. And then we have a literature connection. In Unit 1, Lesson 1, we have Home of the Brave, and we have Zoom, although Zoom, because of the situation right now, we really are not advocating, because the students can't interact correctly, and you may not have enough students in your room. But Home of the Brave is, oh, you can't, oh, I don't know if you can see me right now or not. Can you, or is it full screen? So, pardon?
You're not full screen, but we have a little picture of you in the bottom of the page.
Okay, well, maybe I'll show the books at the end, but I'll talk to you first. So there is a connection for a teacher's guide to each of the books that we have for literature. And once again, I didn't click on it correctly. There it goes. Which helps guide you with questions. So if you want to use them as a study prompt, an entry into their journal, digital journal, if you want to do it as a neat discussion, we've given you kind of an outline of questions that would get you there so that you can get started. So if you're not real comfortable because you've never read the book and you're reading it quickly, so you kind of have the gist of the idea, we have the entire book set for you with questions or things for the students to do that will help them think more about what you're reading. And so just his flight from Africa into Minnesota, I immediately started saying, so talk to me about the conditions and the connections. And the kids are then using vocabulary, and they're now starting to think about those changes, along with just showing them the title of the book and saying, so what do you think the book's going to be about, before we ever start reading. So for Home of the Brave, you will notice that there is a YouTube link. And if you click on it, it is someone who has taken the time to read the entire Home of the Brave book. And it's broken down into sections. So you could assign, you know, his first section or first two sections for them to listen to. But we need to warn you, this is actually illegal for it to be posted. We're okay posting it because somebody else did it, but at some point this will go away. So we suggest that you just read the book yourself and record it. You'll only have to do it once. And then once you have read it and you save it to your drive, then you can bring it up every year because you're giving it to your students. And as an instructor, as long as you're teaching your students, it's totally legal, but we cannot do it for you. This is something that we cannot meet the criteria of the law. So I'm going to stop the share so that you can see my screen better. And I'm going to show you the book. So this is The Home of the Brave. And you can see it's simply showing a little boy with a cow. So you will get all kinds of responses when you say, what do you think this book is going to be about? And then you start reading and it immediately takes you from Africa to Minnesota. And the kids are kind of shocked because they don't understand where this picture is coming from. This book is in a lot of your media centers or in local libraries, or you can order it off the many different sites where you can order books. There are 5 books we highly recommend you use this year. One is Home of the Brave, This Child, Every Child. This book is probably the one book I used religiously every year and got wonderful discussions from it. That also has questions for every single section in that book. So, you know, we're trying to help you when you're using the book along with implementing it into your classroom. If the World Were a Village is based on 100 people. So they take the world and they squish it down to 100, and then they talk about what all of the percentages would be for, you know, religion, for speech, for education. And so one of the first questions is give them something that's attainable to them. At the building I taught at, our teams were about 90 people. And so I'd say, well, think about all of your classmates and then include your teachers. And we would get really close to 100. So when we started talking about it, I'd go, okay, so when we were talking about education, I would do little flat discs. And as the kids walked in the room, they would draw a number out. The number was 1 to 100. And then when we started talking about, you know, 87 of you can read, who's got 1 through 87? And typically you get a pretty good average standing up, and then you go, so what's happening to the rest of you? And it really starts to generate because they start realizing this would affect that small of a group. And so that's what you really need to be thinking about when you're going through that. Secret of the Andes has wonderful descriptive phrases. It talks about a young boy and his culture, and he is a herder of llamas. So it's a great story that's embedded into the unit. The other one we suggest is Chuju's House. And again, this talks about many cultural differences and decisions that were made based on the one-child policy. And we do address it. We talk about the fact it's no longer in place, but how it's affected the population and what's happening in China today. So the literature pieces directly connect with our units. Those are the 5 books we highly suggest you put into your readings. That's all with me.
I'm going to go ahead and get started. Like I said before, I am Andrea Shively. I'm teaching remotely this year to a group of students, and so we're trying to figure things out as we go. The nice thing about what we've done with some of the revisions this summer with Giants is that we have included when we've put resources into Giants, it has one document or one item that you can click on. For instance, like the ancient map we just looked at, ancient cities map. It's the same if you want to print it for your class, if you have a class. If you want to push it out through Google Classroom, you just make a copy, and then when you put it into whatever platform you're in, then you just make sure that you give it to the kids as make a copy for each student, and then they would have it digitally. And so then that's what I'm doing with my students that I am working with remotely this year. So I'm going to show you one of the other items that we do in the first unit, in the first lesson, again, trying to get a better understanding of the world and trying to take it, baby steps as we go. So one of the important concepts is to identify where the equator is and some other important pieces of information. I'm going to share my screen with you and then open it up and show you what I'm going to send out to my students. So this is an example of the digital notebook that I put together and that we worked on. And so, there's a few things that are in here. I included a table of contents. I gave the directions to my students that every time I give them a slide to put in there, that they also need to hyperlink it into their table of contents. And so, for instance, we just did decide where to live. And when they add that slide, it will ask them if they want to link it to the rest of the slide presentation. And so I just put it right in there, and it will tell me that it is linked to slide 6. If for some reason I shuffle the slides or I put one in and it moves everything down, this link will stay with it. For instance, if I added an additional slide before slide 6, then this would push to decide where to live down to slide 7. So, and that would bring them right to it. The reason I did that and want my students to do that is so that they're not scrolling through 20 or 30 slides to get to the most current one. I imagine this to be just like the spiral notebook, the paper and pencil version that I used to do. And so I wanted them to have a fast, easy way to access the pages or slides in their digital notebook quickly, especially as we build it throughout the year. So one of the things that we have done, there's a lesson about making their own compass rose. And so I did that. I made an example and spent a little bit of time on it, added some colors and pictures and things like that. But I found that was really engaging and that I thought students would really like that. This is a pre-test, and you can see that there's a list of several things that we want to see what students know when they're starting this unit and how much information they have. So I would give this, if I was in a classroom, I would just give this out as a paper copy and print it and have them work on it as best they can as a starting point. And one of the reasons that we like to do this is that it also is a way to measure how much they grow and learn from the subsequent lessons that we go through. And once they take this again as a post-test, then when I give it back to them, I also let them, I have their pre-test collected, and so I let them see both and see how much, hopefully how much better they've improved upon it. So if I gave this out digitally, I would again push it out as a Google slide and tell the students that this would be an assignment that they would turn in to me, and it would have a due date on it and so forth. So one of the first things it is asking us to label continents in that. So doing that digitally, whether it's kids working on a Chromebook or whatever in a classroom and working on it digitally, or at home remotely, they can add a text box, and then they can go ahead and put their labels on. they can go through and draw and label the equator. So I would grab a line segment and try to line it up as best I can. It's kind of a little rough, a little crooked. I could also even make that line a different color, or I could make it thicker, so that would help to see it a little bit better and to have it stand out a little bit more. So I can keep going with that and adding information as I go. I could draw the Tropic of Cancer. And again, even with that, if I grab the line segment and get it in there, I can turn it into a dash line, and again, make it a little bit thicker so it's easy to see. So students, I think this would be highly engaging for students in both in the classroom if they were working on a device in the classroom and doing this digitally, as well as students that are working with it at home. The post-test, after they go through some of the other activities, then the post-test looks exactly the same. And then they would turn that in as an assignment for a grade, and that would be graded. So again, it's just another way that we've been able to try to accommodate both in-person learning and virtual learning as well. So hopefully that'll help with just giving you some ideas of some different ways that you can keep students engaged in social studies online. Okay, and yep, and I think that's it for my section, and we're going back to Carol.
I have to figure out how to unmute my, you are, okay, you're all good, thank you. Here we are. Okay. Let me see if I just need to be able to see here. Okay, I am we have showed you several of our presentations and activities, and what I'm going to do next is give you a kind of overview of our purposes and the structure of what we're doing. It's just about 10, 11 slides. So here we go. In the latest 2019 official Michigan State Department of Education 2019 approved content expectations for different grade levels, they refer to 6th grade as a world geography course. Now, definitely, there are not just geography content expectations, but there are also civics and economics, history, definitely also have content expectations, but they have titled this a world geography course. I suspect this is in preparation for 7th grade, where they start looking at world history. There are different ways to organize a world geography course. If you ask Phil how he would organize a world geography course, he would probably use the one that is on the slide in front of you, where it says, I'm going to look at regions. I'm going to focus on one portion of the world, and then I'm going to move to another portion of the world. And I think, although I'm not expert in this, that is the organization method used by TCI, for example, to show you how Giant 6th grade has decided to take a unit and focus on different parts of the world. You see one in Africa and one in South America. That means that we have chosen to focus on Africa and South America in our first unit, but in our second unit, we moved to the second largest country in the world, a large country in area and in population. We moved to China, number 2. In Unit 3, we moved to North America, but also to Russia. 4, we focus on what we call South Asia. That would be India and its neighbors, and also the Middle East. And our last unit focuses on Europe. So that's what we mean by organizing a course by regions. And here you see that, for example, you remember that Sharon showed you a literature connection about Africa and also a literature connection about South America. Or when she showed, that was for Unit 1, where we focus on physical geography. Unit 2, she showed you Kyuju's house, which was a literature connection about China, but also about the topic population. And so we do certainly focus on regions, kind of one after the other, although we do refer back to them. But there is another way to organize a course, and that is by themes. And I don't know if you've had experience with the kind of course that says, well, first we're going to look at population, whether world population or population of countries. And then in a later unit, we're going to look at culture. We decided that in addition to organizing the course by regions, we were also going to organize it by themes. And we got our themes from the Michigan's 2019 Social Studies Content Expectations. The only reason we came up with a theme for population is because there were content standards about population, which we thought we could not ignore. Or in Unit 1, the reason we came up with a theme called physical geography is because there definitely are content expectations, a group of them, about the importance of physical geography. For example, climate. Remember, we looked at temperature before, or we looked at temperatures near the equator. But just a reminder, even though this course is called Grade 6 World Geography, we try to integrate into every unit, not only geography, but history content, expectations, economics, civics. You will see them in every unit. Let me go to the next slide. If I were going to, now, these are the themes that we use a world region to emphasize. So we emphasize physical geography in Africa, using South America. We emphasize culture using South Asia, for example, the very important differences of religions in South Asia, the importance of different religions in the Middle East, for example. China is a wonderful example of a part of the world having a huge population and then the government deciding what is it going to do about population in China. But we talk about population not only in China, but also in all other parts of the world. Our theme or our compelling question for each of our units, for example, our compelling question for Unit 1 is, what conditions make a place more desirable? Are there temperature conditions? Well, there probably were for ancient cities that made some places more desirable at that point in time. Our theme, all of our themes or compelling questions are based on content expectations. And to be a compelling question, it needed to be open to more than one answer, to many possible answers, and to be something that people could care about, whether in their daily lives or just found interesting. We have supporting questions, for example, logically, if we're emphasizing physical geography, what do temperature conditions matter, precipitation, or elevation? South America is our wonderful place to look at the importance of elevation. Just to illustrate, and I don't want to get too detailed here, but when we have this overarching compelling question, what conditions make a place more desirable, we are using that question to deal with a geography content expectation that emphasizes region, or climate types, or patterns of settlement, or ecosystems as a consequence of latitude. You remember putting the equator on? Or ecosystems as a consequence of elevation. So let me go here. What we've done is try to coordinate the two different approaches to organizing a course where we use themes and regions. We try to talk about the physical geography, content expectations by using the world, but especially Africa and South America as these wonderful places to understand physical geography. If we move to Unit 2, we're focusing on population, content expectations, and there many parts of the world, but especially China, are our focus. Let's see what I can show you here. Look. So we have human environment interaction as a collection of content expectations that we feel we need to address. Culture and movement. Movement is really interesting. It's really meaty, and I think if you come with me down here to Unit 5, our kind of larger compelling question, our theme is how do diffusion, trade, and migration affect people in different places? Oh my goodness. Do you know what is diffusing throughout the world right now? A virus. But other things that connect the world, that move, that spread, are trade and immigration, and those are really interesting topics. And I think that's the end of that. If I can get, I'll put this one down, and I'll do one more thing while I'm sharing here. Let's see, can I share this one? Okay, I need help. I need to share another thing.
Phil's on its way.
Help is on its way? Oh, Phil's on his way. I hear footsteps. Okay, so I have another PowerPoint.
So have you fixed it?
No, I need to figure out how to share it.
Well, I think the only answer is to stop share.
Resume share? Aha. Oops, no. That was the old one. Okay. Stop share. Okay. I just have to bring the new one up.
Find your new one.
Find my new one. Here we go. Share.
And there it is.
There it is. Okay, sorry guys. Share. All right. I didn't know who else was going to do this, so I wanted to show you where you could find things. And this is at a site. It's Social Studies OAISD. And what I'd like you to see here is what it looks like, so you'll know you got there. We have a Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3. If you click on the yellow bar by Unit 1, that will take you to, I would take you, there are 3 lessons. I would start in lesson 1, although I realize I need to make some fixes, so I will fix that as soon as possible. You click on Unit 1, Lesson 1, right here, and that will bring you to the teacher's guide. And the teacher's guide shows our compelling question, our supporting questions. But what we'd like you to notice is we have steps that kind of says, are we at the beginning of this lesson or are we at the end of it? Instructions, kind of the logic. Why are we doing this? What is this about? And is in the middle. And on the right-hand side are all of the presentations. You click on a presentation as Sharon was showing you before. You click on a presentation, that will bring that up on your screen. You can download it. You'll have a copy of it that you can then push onto whatever platform you're using, so you can make a copy for your students and put it into Google Classroom. So I think that's what I have here. And let's see. I think we could have Phil start. So I'm going to close this off.
For what it's worth, Zoom actually has slightly different commands than it did when I did these workshops with Minnesota and New York about a month ago. And so the screen sharing is behaving a little bit differently. Can you see this as a full screen PowerPoint right now?
Yes.
Okay. We had started out this to say, children see a map through different networks. And I want to show how that connects to the curriculum, and particularly to some of the ideas that they have shown you about how do you put the equator on and how do you make a region, and some of these ideas. Our brains have got a complex bunch of networks. The joke that we usually use is if our brains were simple enough that we could understand them, we would be so simple we couldn't. And it's just plain complicated. I asked you to imagine a room with 9 books on 9 tables. I said there's a door here, there's a treasure, $50 hiding underneath this book. I've shown this particular PowerPoint to over 800 teachers right now, and only 2 people have actually found the $50 bill yet. This is you. And the question is, how do you remember where the treasure is? Now, if we were all sitting in a room here, I would be taking a poll and having you raise your hand and vote and all that other kind of thing. But I'm just going to put up what some of the answers were, because about 1 out of 10 people will remember that table as being the one that's closest to my right hand. Now, that's 1 out of 10 adults. That's about 4 out of 10 second graders and about 2 out of 10 sixth graders. In other words, it's the way a younger child often organizes their view of a map. About the half of you probably said something like it's on the orange table, and about a third of you said it's in the middle of the first row, and about a quarter probably said it's the book that's in the front middle of its table here. And my point is, every one of these is a different network in your brain. The fact is, your brain is actually doing them all at the same time, but you're only aware of one of them. In other words, table number 1 is on the top of your head, and table number 2 is in front of your right ear, and table number 3, and so on. So I'm going to take you over to another room, and it has the treasure that's in the same place as that first one was. And my question for you is very simple. Which table has the treasure? Now, I've numbered 6 of the tables because these are the only ones that people have voted for in previous classes. But if you want one of the others, help yourself and give it a number, 7. The fact is, this answer is not at all simple. It depends upon which mode of spatial organization your brain is using at the moment. So, has everybody voted? You're allowed to vote for one number. And if you said, it's table number 1, that's an aura, that's near my right hand, that's a little brain network right up in the top middle of your head. If you said it's table number 2, it's on the orange table, that's a color association, that's in the front of your right ear. If you said table number 3, the middle of the first row, that's a spatial sequence, and that network is actually over your left eyebrow in your head. If you said it's the table book that's in the front middle of its table, so that would be table 4, the same position on the table, that's a spatial analogy. It's kind of like Hong Kong is like Shanghai. They're at the same latitude. They're on the east side. They both have a fair amount of hurricanes. Hong Kong is like Miami, sorry. You might have thought it's table number 5, the sequence that's on the door side of the room. Or you might have said it was table number 6. Now, only 2 people have ever done this out of the last 800. But the fact is, that's where it is. If you think about it for a little while, the book was in the bottom middle of the table that was in the bottom middle of the room. And 6 is the only one where the book is in the corner of the table where the table is in the room. And if that didn't occur to you, then you have just exposed one of the really serious weaknesses with multiple choice high stakes tests. Because very often, some of the students in the room will overthink the question and they will come up with a perfectly right answer that never occurred to the people designing the test. Now, you're saying this is all really very abstract. What does this possibly have to do with teaching 6th grade world geography? Let me just say the bottom line. Human brains have multiple networks. They operate in parallel and not always consciously. And if you want, there is an awful lot of research backing this up because I've done a lot of reading about this research. This, by the way, helps explain different kinds of dyslexia because there is spatial shape dyslexia and spatial sequence dyslexia and spatial analogy dyslexia. And they are separate brain networks. And this is how it goes into a geography classroom. This is a nice colorful map from a very popular primary school atlas. I don't want to pick on this particular atlas because in fact, there are a lot of them published. I own 26 of them. And if I might point out, if kids had actually been able to learn from any one of these 3 maps, they would not have screwed up my test about where the deserts are and where the rainforest is. The simple fact is, I'm not going to say don't use this thing. I mean, if you're a great teacher, you can use anything as a teaching tool. But the evidence is clear. Children do not automatically learn a significant amount of geography from this kind of map. It's a shame that this is the kind of map we give kids, but there's a good reason for that. It's the kind of map that wins focus groups with parents. And anyway, let's look at this grain symbol, because grain was really important. You know, it helped make the ancient empires work. How might a child's brain encode that location? How will you remember where that is? And I suggest that in 2nd grade at least, 40% of them are going to remember that that's the symbol that's near the gorilla. That's table number 1, close to my right hand. Some of them are going to remember it's associated with the light green color. That's table number 2. Some are going to remember it's between the camel and the oil well. That's table number 3. Some of them are going to remember it's in the northern part of Nigeria. That's table number 4, the book of the certain part of the table. Some of them are going to remember it's like Goa, which is another similar place, and so on. In other words, just like with the treasure on the tables on that really abstract map, people can unconsciously encode the location of a map symbol in a lot of different ways. And what they remember depends on how they encoded it and what the test looks like. So how does this work in the classroom? And here I'm going to put on my other hat. My job actually wasn't to work with 6th grade. My job was to work with 2nd and 3rd grade. And so I've been making these maps about Michigan and things like that. My wife is the one that's been working with 6th grade. So in 2nd grade, we have them read a story about camels. It's a particularly good thing to read about. Just like that story about a boy that moved from Sudan to Minnesota is a particularly good reading to help teach geography concepts. And then we encourage skills of spatial thinking. And I would say, don't just point to a camel on a complicated map because they will not remember it. What you should do is give them a real simple map of camels. Does this, by the way, look anything like the real simple map of ancient cities that Carol gave you? In other words, we're going to do the same thing with this, but we're doing it in 2nd grade. Draw a line around where the camels live. And then you can color that line. And then I can read a script to the kids. Hey, kids, you just made a regional map. A region, that's a big word. We're going to put it up on our word wall. Yeah, they do learn the word region in 2nd and 3rd grade. But you're in 6th grade, and they might not have had giants back in 3rd grade. So you might have to diagnose and teach that word when you get in. And you can tell the 2nd graders, hey, Africa is really big. It's really far away. But you kids are smart. You can tell me something about Africa, even though you've never been there, just by looking at this map. Now, if I were in a group of 2nd grade teachers, we'd go Socratic now, and I'd ask you, what question would you ask? Because you're going to need to ask the same question when you look at the ancient cities. Carol had you do that, saying, how do you describe this pattern? And in 2nd grade, we just ask them, do camels like to live in the north part of Africa or the south? And if you just learned that much, then you know where the camel region is. Now, of course, they need to know about the word north and south and so on, and that's our 1st grade lessons. And we've done this. Carol and I had a bunch of 1st grade classrooms in Harlem. These are their actual drawings that they did. They were very high interest back then. The point that I want to make in this entire PowerPoint is that these spatial associations are cumulative. If a 1st or 2nd grader learns where camels live, it's a whole lot easier to learn where deserts are when they come into 6th grade. Now, if your kids haven't done a camel map, we'll show you where you can get a camel map and you can have them do it. Because if they've learned where the camels are, then they also know where Islam was in 7th grade. Because Muhammad's uncle was a camel trader and Islam spread by people who traveled on camels and spoke Arabic and so on. So the bottom line for teachers is that different kids encode information in different ways. You have to guide them to use the same way by asking a good question. What part of Africa do camels live in? Where are the ancient cities relative to the Tropic of Cancer? And I'll demonstrate that when we go out and look at these maps. So with proper guidance, every kid can learn how to do all of this better. Giants just provides a way to do that guidance. They need to learn how to learn from maps, and they should do that learning with maps that matter. In other words, camels matter. UFO sightings or Coca-Cola names don't matter. Ancient cities do matter. Refugees matter. things like that. Now, the way I get to the other one with our new rules is to stop this sharing, get rid of this, and start sharing again with a different screen. And with any luck, do you see the word chapters up there?
Yes.
And if I hold this up here, can you see the URL in your little diagram there? Anyway, this is part of the big ideas. It is a set of electronic chapters, and I'll put the URL up at the end where you can find this. This is my quick and dirty way to get at the chapters, the clickable maps, the presentations, and some activities. And when you take a look at this menu of the big idea chapters, these are electronic chapters. If I go to the one that we've been talking about most of the day today, which is out in China, you will get a picture about a high population density area. You get exactly what Carol said, that the chapter is about population density, but it focuses on that by looking at East Asia, specifically at China, as its regional example. Then there'll be a table of contents here. It tells you why is China a good GeoLab to use to describe population density. Carol already mentioned that. It has a page definition of population density, and then it's got a list of consequences. Now, there are a number of ways that you can use this electronic book. One way is to call it a textbook, and that is, it is just the book that underlies the course. And the Giants thing will refer to specific chapters in this book in the different sections of the Giants curriculum. Another way that you can use it is to assign different chapter sections to different students and have them do a report about it, because each of the major sections is a consequence of population density. And one consequence of population density is that more people can produce more stuff. People can build big projects. It's easier to defend yourself if you have 1,000 soldiers next to you than if you have 2. More people are likely to have more inventions. We've even got a section in there about how population density is related to disease. I mean, we were way ahead of 2020 on this particular thing. And the point about this is Dave has set this up as an interactive book. So if you want to go straight to the chapter on disease, then click on disease and you will get a section of the role of population in disease. And what you're going to find out is that China had at least 4 times in the past when they lost half of their population to disease. That's a kind of a staggering number. Europe lost 1/3 of it during the Black Death. Roman Empire lost 1/3 of the population around 480 AD. Diseases aren't new. And at the bottom of each of these sections, you can go back to the table of contents and pick another one to look at. You know, maybe I want to look at defense. And then it's got stuff about defense, and it's got about the Great Wall of China. In other words, it's a textbook, but it's an interactive textbook. And at the end, it's got a section called Putting It All Together to say, how can population density help us understand China? And then it talks about human rights and freedom and one-child policy and environmental impact and all that kind of thing. Now, that's the chapters. If that menu would quit scrolling across my screen there, I could go back to the chapter menu. It has direct links over to the presentations, the maps, and when you click on this, it will come up in another window. So if I click on maps, I will get a window of the clickable maps. So we started out by giving you an Africa map like this and saying, this is a completely interactive map that you can use to teach a lot of ideas about latitude. So to do latitude, you want to find the equator. It probably helps to put the tropic lines on it. And then you can look at all kinds of things, like where did the camels live? And at any time, you can clear the map off. I could put the camels up here and then say, well, how much rain does it get where the camels are? The answer is not very much. A camel is designed to live in an environment that doesn't rain a lot. What kind of animal is going to live when there is a lot of rain? And then the kid can go try to figure out, is it going to be an elephant or a chimpanzee? I can put the camels up here and say, what would this look like on a satellite image? And you find out the camels are sitting there very carefully right at the edges of the desert. There are some deserts that are actually too dry even for camels. And that's not a bad thing to know. I mentioned that camels were related to the spread of religions, and you can put religions on here. You see what I'm saying is you have a map that has a lot of consequences of latitude. Where do the fires break out in January? And what animal lives in the area where fires are fairly common? You can always put the ecoregions, the one that we've seen 7 or 8 times already today. And it will take you right up to the present day with colonial claims and where are the big cities, and clear the map one more time. One of the things that people just don't believe could be related to rainfall would be something like languages. Look at the relationship. Because where you've got a lot of rain, people don't have to travel very far, and their language slowly changes to be a little bit different from their neighbors. Where up here, where they're riding camels, you have to trade over a huge network, and there actually is a thing about trade routes over here. In any case, that's what the clickable maps are on. And then you're telling me, how would I know all this stuff? I mean, I'm just a beginning geography teacher. I've never done that before. That's why we did the presentations. Because if you click on any one of these presentations, it will download a presentation that takes you step by step through the clickable maps and tells you a story. And the presentations have 2 parts. It tells you a story, and then it repeats the whole thing. I'm not going to go show you a presentation because I'm sure Zoom will lose me if I try to do that. The presentations are pretty self-explanatory. They're designed for teachers. They're a kind of a crash course for you about these geographic facts, about what things are related to latitude in Africa and to altitude, elevation in South America. And then there was one more button, and that was a link to some activities. These I can show you because it's that same set of regions. This is a set of activities that kind of illustrate how you use these maps. And we just happen to have an activity about COVID-19 here. So it clicks up here, and up comes a 1-page activity about coronavirus population density in Chinese history. And these activities all have all these URLs right on them. So go to the Big Ideas chapters, click here, click on chapter 8 about population, and read the first 3 sections. Then click on the globe, and it'll bring up a clickable map. Click the 2 buttons to see cities and city names, and find Wuhan. Remember, Wuhan is where this virus was first discovered over here. How would you describe the location of this city in China? In other words, what we've got is a package of 20 activities that you can download on those days when you just didn't have time to get your act kind of together. I mean, we know those days are coming. And this will get you something that will work fast. Don't waste them, because the problem with these, I'm not going to say these are bad activities. I mean, I wrote about 1/3 of them, and other teachers wrote the other 2/3. I've edited them a little bit. These are pretty good activities, but they are not a curriculum. What Giants is a curriculum. It's a set of activities that build on each other and support each other and complement each other. So there is a package of activities out here. They will help your students use the clickable maps. They can be used both remotely and in person, but they're not a curriculum. So you should, when you've got enough time to look at the curriculum in Giants, you should go through the Giants step by step, part 1, part 2, part 3, and see how these things work together. If you run into a day where you just, something happened last night, your kid was sick, whatever, this package of activities will give you a rescue. And it will give you a rescue that uses the same maps that Giants uses all the way through. So the maps will keep reinforcing each other. They will keep building a better and better mental map among the kids that you've got. So the bottom of each one of these, it's got a whole set of extensions. It compares population to the United States. In other words, at the bottom, it gives you links back to Giants and to the activities that they already have in there. And it's got to click directly over to the clickable maps. So that's my 15-minute spiel on how you use the different clickable maps. I'd be happy to go over here and open up any of the others. There is a whole set in the middle here, including, here's one on ancient cities where I can put up my temperature numbers. And if I don't want to color them all individually, I can just click on more hot places and they're all done. Click on the cold places and they're all done. And then I can put the city region in between. So whenever you put these up, they always stay on your buttons over here. So I can go back to my previous button here and say, how are those things related to the religions? I can look at where Islam was. I can look at where the Catholic Church went. Now, you don't get to religion until part 5, but your kids are going to wind up being, some of them at least, getting addicted to these clickable maps, and they're going to start looking at the other ones. So you might just want to spend a weekend and kind of nose around and see what's in there. Like I say, it is a rich resource. It's been under construction for more than 6 years. It's still got a few bugs in it because Dave and I weren't able to get together this summer and debug some of it. COVID having come along and messed up a whole lot of things here.
Yeah, but Phil, now we're complete Zoom aficionados, so we can always do it by that. But I do miss our meet in Newaygo at that restaurant and open and close the place meetings.
Yeah, we have done that. So I need to officially unclick out of my thing here. And guess what? I don't see my thing here. There we go. Stop share. You're on.
So this is Carol. We were going to have the last section of tonight's network. We were going to, it was going to be a wrap up and some technology troubleshooting by Becky and Dave and Roy. But also, if you've come up with, I haven't had a chance to look at all the questions, but this would be a time where if you want to see anything, if you have questions or want to see more, Sharon and Andrea and I could answer questions. But do you guys want to go to the breakout with Roy and Dave and Becky?
Well, I'm not sure we set up a mechanism for people to respond if they want to throw a response in the chat. Maybe that's where they're going right now. But we could still divide up and take a few minutes and see if people have questions about their learning management system and putting the system in there.
I also saw a question. Would you want me to answer that question? It says, I saw a pretest, but are there summative assessments in Giants? Right now we have summative assessments written for Unit 1 at the end of Unit 1, Unit 2, and Unit 3. How we get those to you right now, they either are or will be in Inquisit, but I think Andrea and Becky can let us know about Inquisit. So I'm going to mute myself.
Take it away, Andrea.
Well, we do have, for instance, for Unit 1, that is both a, it's located in Inquisit. That's one that is through the OAISD. And what it is, we've broken this test into two different sections. There's what we call selected response, which would be multiple choice, matching, those kinds of things. And then the second part of it is a constructed response, and that includes teacher grading and a rubric that goes along with it. So it is kind of both styles or both ways that you can assess students that way. Some people that don't have that access to Inquisit, we've tried to come up with other ways to support them. The issue we run into is if we post the test, the cumulative test there in Giants, then that is an open website. So both teachers and students could get into it in that. So that's one of the ways that we've tried to protect it, is by not posting it in there. We've had people that have requested it that are not involved in the Inquisit program. So that's one of the issues that we're dealing with, is how do we keep that test protected so that it's not put out there on the web for someone to share the answers with and things like that. The second part of that too is in Unit 2, that's a argumentative writing essay. And so again, that also follows that process of students looking at some document. It's basically document-based question, and looking at some documents, being able to form their opinion and then support it with evidence and develop a clear, concise argument justifying their opinion. That's a requirement for our districts as far as including writing in subject areas other than ELA. So that's what we have for Unit 2 and Unit 4. And then we have more of the traditional assessments for Units 1, 3, and then a project at the end of Unit 5. So kind of a variety of assessments.
So if someone, because this came up in the chat, if Inquisit is it's multifunctional, but one of the things it does is assessments, and it's something that Ottawa Area Intermediate School District developed. And Becky, you can correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but and so I think a lot of districts where in the elementary they use Delta Math already have access to Inquisit. But if you don't use Delta Math, then it is something additional to pay for. So what I'm going to ask on the question side of things before we kick off the official Q&A, is there another way that teachers participating in the network can access those outside of Inquisit?
And I would say two things. Number one, what we had done in the past with 7th grade is that when folks wanted one of the quizzes or wanted to see what the writers had put together, they would send me an email and I would share that with them. They were in Google Docs. And we can certainly do that this year too. The other thing is that we probably, because our group is rather small, we probably could do a pilot this year for the teachers who are wanting to participate in the networks and to use Giants in its entirety. We probably could do a pilot where they would be able to have access to Inquisit for a year without any charge. And that's something that I would have to clarify with my supervisors, but I don't anticipate that being a problem either.
So on that end, then it would end up being, if that were able to be possible, teachers would probably have to submit like class lists to someone over at Ottawa to get the class. We'll figure out the nuts and bolts on that front, but I just wanted to make sure that was clarified because that popped up in the chat. Not seeing questions pop up in the chat. We had envisioned closing tonight with the, I see one from Michelle. We had, and that's actually a good segue. We had envisioned tonight kind of ending with some breakout groups into, at least 2, if not 3, depending on what people are using, where we have a Google Classroom breakout group for those of you that are using Google Classroom as your LMS. And we'd have a breakout group for Canvas just to kind of talk about structure, how you might set that up, do some general Q&A on how you might put that stuff together. Because we felt like that might be, after the content, that might be something beneficial for everyone that's on here. So what we might do to break people out into the various rooms.
Dave, can I make a recommendation?
Yeah, please. I was about, go.
I'm wondering if it's worth, we could do it 2 ways. People could put it in the chat, which they are, Canvas, Google Classroom, other. Yep. Or we could walk them very quickly through renaming themselves and put GC for Google Classroom, just C for Canvas, and O for other. And then when you go to do the breakout rooms, it's easy to select them.
That's exactly where I was headed we both learned that from Troy this summer. That was great.
Yes, we did. Yep. It's a great,
that was a great trick. So if you guys want to rename yourselves, I don't think I can break into breakout rooms because I'm not the official host. I think Becky has to do that. But if you want to rename yourself with a GC in front of your name for Google Classroom, CA for Canvas, and a OT for other, we'll see if we need that third breakout room, and we'll kind of start that discussion.
If you're on a PC or a laptop, desktop, you select participants, and then that'll open up on the right. And when you hover over your name by the microphone and video icons, a more button will appear, and you select that, and in that drop-down menu is rename. If you're on a phone, I really don't know how to do it.
I'm on my iPad and I'm trying to see how I would do it here. It looks like if I hold down on it on my iPad, it gives me an option. It brings up that force touch menu that gives me an option to rename. So that should work on an iPhone too if you hold down on your name and then release.
Becky,
as people do that, be sure to make a note to yourself to go back and change it or remove it, or if you want to wait till the next time you're in a Zoom meeting, to take that designation off.
I'm not seeing any Canvas ones come up. A lot of Google Classroom. Kathy. Okay, Kathy is Canvas.
the issue with Canvas and me, and Roy knows this, is that Canvas we're hooked to Accelerate in Genesee County, and they don't have geography. They don't have Michigan standards, they use national standards. What I've been doing is cheating and putting it on Google Classroom, and I just set up a link because I have to use Canvas. So I set up a little clickable link on my Canvas welcome page that goes right to Google Classroom, and I can do what I want there. So far, I haven't been caught. But Roy, if there's a trick, I'm happy to learn it, because eventually I'm going to get caught. It's inevitable.
I'm having some conversation with a couple other teachers. I'm going to work with the techs here to see if I can get access with another teacher or two teachers, and we can put all of the Giant 6th grade into Canvas as a kind of a template, and then people can copy that stuff out. We'd have to do it throughout the school year, obviously, because we can't do it all at once. And we'd have to kind of choreograph that work so we know where we're working and figure that out. But I have to first talk with the techs to see if those permissions are going to work. So that's one option. But in the meantime, I think you're doing it right. You put your homepage in Canvas and then link out to Google Classroom.
So, okay.
So I guess we don't need a breakout room because everyone is currently using Google Classroom. So let's talk about how you structure this in Google Classroom here. And I'm not the expert on that, so I'm going to mute. But how are you envisioning what questions do you have about structuring it? How you might link some of the activities in? Let's if you want to unmute, feel free to do that. I believe Becky's account has the hand raise feature, so that might be a better possibility. I have emojis on mine, so maybe the thumbs up if you have a question, or and yeah, let's try it that way.
One of the questions that was in the chat, well, it was just basically a statement about trying to break the content down into bite-sized pieces into Google Classroom. And I can say that from having to go remote last spring like everybody else, and then now teaching remote full-time, that's that's one of the things that I've really taken a look at and have tried to figure out ways to modify it. Being familiar with Giants and using it for the last few years, I know what I want to get across to my students, and I've somewhat figured out like the pacing of it, like about how much time it would take. So for my example that I showed earlier with my Google Classroom, because I don't want to have to maintain it daily. I'm in charge of a little over 200 students right now. I've put it out by the week, and that way I'm hoping that it gives the students enough to get through the content with enough breaks along the way so that they're successful doing it independently. And I've included things like checks for understanding. So one of my frequent go-tos is using a Google form, such as an exit ticket, or like I showed you when they did the vote. Then I know who's gone through that and looked at it without having to have been in a Google Meet with all my students and talking them through it. So I can already tell, based on the number of responses from that first Google form question about where would you decide to live, that I know who's gotten that far and who hasn't, because that was embedded directly into the PowerPoint. And so whenever you get a PowerPoint off of the Giant site, first thing I would do is view it. Well, actually, I'd make a copy first, and I leave the name copy in the title of the, so I remember that that's my copy and I can manipulate it. I take out slides. Sometimes the slides are too long or there's too many of them. And if I was in the classroom, I would flip through them a little bit faster. And so I just really pick and choose what I want the kids to see. And then once I have it all set, that's where I may embed a check for understanding. And then I put it out there, I push it out to the kids to view it. If it's a document or something I want them to have a copy of, then I push it out, like the Google Slides that include maps, I push it out as a Google slide, and then I click on make copy for every student. And when you do that, you still have viewing rights as a teacher in Google Classroom to see it. And actually their digital notebook, I will view and grade in the first 9 weeks. So they'll get a quarterly grade on their digital notebook, and they have a rubric for it. So they have to share that with me, and that helps me to see, are they keeping up and maintaining as they go. But I would say the biggest thing that I figured out from that was just, you know, think about what it would do, what it would take for a student to kind of click through this in the amount of time. And I estimated about 5 class periods, 3 to 5 class periods a week worth work. And that's what I pushed out.
Andrea, just out of curiosity, are your students working asynchronously, and or do you meet with them at specific times, or are you only meeting with them throughout the week at specific times, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, I'm for the most part, they're working asynchronously. They are, but we do have our scheduled Google Meets. And so I go through, it's a chance for us to build community, but also for me to connect and talk to them about what's coming up. And so I will, let them know what are some of the activities or items that they're going to be working on that week in Google Classroom, and how they can reach out and ask questions if they need to, or if we have to set up separate Google Meets. So they kind of get a preview, and then and then we meet at the end of the week, and we'll kind of summarize what they've done. So if there's anybody that has not been keeping up with it, I can reach out to them and send an email specifically to them, but it kind of keeps the whole group moving together at the same time. So that's what I've been working on, but I've only been doing this for 3 days this week, right? But that's how we handled it last spring, was just pushing them out about a week at a time, and meeting with kids and trying to make sure that they were staying on track.
Okay, thanks. Are there certain things you have found with your students, either in the spring or now, that you found are a better way to organize things so you have less problems with kids navigating in Google Classroom?
One of the things that I came across was just organizing it, and I organize it by the week. And so when I put the assignments into classwork, I create a topic first, and then and so I have the topic for this upcoming week, 9/14 to 9/19 or something, whatever. And so all those assignments will go in there, and I can they're bundled together for students. So when they look at it, they know all those assignments are there, or presentations that they have to view. And it's not, I removed any kind of work or any kind of information that they needed to view, like a presentation. I removed that from the stream or the first page in Google Classroom. I just want to go back. Yeah, the stream, they call it. So I put it all in there, and there's different titles like materials. So that's where I put the presentations. I've been labeling when it's going to be a digital notebook page. so that they know this is going to be, not only will they get a copy, but they'll have to do something to it and they'll have to put it into their notebook. I'm learning as I go, just like them.
But you have found your container, your biggest container in which you put the Giants pieces into, that you have customized for you and your students, is really labeled for the week.
Mhm.
Okay. And then do you have other subcontainers that keep organized, or do you just put each of the things in a list that the students have to address in order that they need to do them?
Yeah, I just put them, I put them in and I time them so that the release is like 7:40 on Monday morning is the first presentation. So that would be listed first, and then 7:45 is the assignment that goes with it. And, so I keep it like that. When it has to be turned in, then if you're familiar with Google Classroom, then you get the, you can click on that assignment and you can see who's turned it in and who hasn't. And that's where you can go through and grade. You can give feedback. You can also return an assignment if they have not, if they've missed the mark, or if they've turned it in incomplete, things like that. Then I just return it to them and I type in a message. They subscribe to the, I think they automatically subscribe to the classroom. So whenever there is a comment or a message sent, they'll get an email in their Gmail to make them aware of it. And the same for me. Like, so I posted the YouTube of Home of the Brave because, all my students being at home, I don't know who has access to that book. So I just connected the YouTube video to it. And every so often, in the last couple of days, I've had kids comment, and it'll just pop up in my Gmail. Oh, this is such a great book, or I read it in 5th grade and it's, it still is such a good story, and things like that. So, I can get some of that interaction with them. But yeah, at this point, I'm sure you can make it even simpler, your organization, but that's just the way my brain's been working right now. And maybe I'll get a little bit better at it as I go.
Well, that's helpful, thanks. Others that have specific questions about Google Classroom? Michelle's asking, I'm also wondering about how you teach them to assemble their online digital notebook, and if you have the rubric available to view. And that could be available to view to us, so Michelle can see it, but and/or the students. I'm assuming you give that rubric to students in advance.
Yeah, I've pushed out the digital notebook. We have a sample of one in Giants, and we've described it as a sample or example. It's not considered a template because you just have to find what works with you. I know some teachers have used it and they have made a copy, and then they have added pages or they've taken pages away. In the sample, I kind of made what I thought would look like a complete digital notebook that had all 5 units in it, and then I left like a blank slide between each of the units that'll come up later on in the year. So just being aware that that it's going to continue to build and grow. That's why one of the biggest things I realized was you gotta link the slides every time you add one. You have to link it to the table of contents. Otherwise, it's like a spiral notebook. You don't want to flip through 30 slides to get to the page that you're working on currently in December or January. So I give them a rubric in that, and then again in the directions, every time I give them a slide, then I tell them that they have to add it to their notebook. They should be able to push it right in there or make a copy and put it right in there. And then I can also view it and see whether or not they're keeping up with it as well. Since we just started, I haven't had a chance to really peek at it. I've looked at a couple of kids just to make sure that they're doing that. But I clicked on it when I showed an example. So it did have, I think we're up to 7 or 8 slides in my class right now. And the first few of them are things like the cover, the table of contents, the rubric. And the rubric is really generic. It's a very generic one. Student has shown evidence of learning. Student has shown some evidence of learning. Student has shown little or no evidence of learning. It's very simple to go through and grade. I used it in my classroom last year when I graded paper and pencil spiral notebooks. And I just think it's important. I think they put a lot of work into it, and I want to see what they're doing, and I want to give them some credit for the work they've done with it too. So,
Andrea, is this similar to what we were using when we were both doing?
oh yeah.
Do we want to put that in as an example of a rubric? Can we just attach it into Giants? I mean,
Sure.
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
And know when you see the rubric, both Andrea and I used it, but we did not grade 100% the same when we graded. I know when Andrea said table of contents, if my kids did not go back, say the very first time I graded it, they did not have their table of contents complete, they received a 0 or a 1. I don't remember the number scale anymore. If it wasn't complete in the second 9 weeks, I still marked them down. So at the end of the year, they may still be getting a 0 or a 1 point because their table of contents, they still had not taken the time to complete. Not every teacher agrees with that philosophy, but if we're going to grade on a table of contents, I felt it needed to be complete. So it's part of that rigor of, getting kids to realize they can achieve those top grades if they want, but you can alter that rubric to be much more defined. Ours was really very basic. It was very quick to grade the notebooks physically, and I wouldn't think digitally it would take that much longer. Maybe quicker, I don't know.
Yeah, one of the other things is that I used to, when I was in the classroom, I used to make a paper pencil notebook with them. And I'm doing the same thing online as well. So I'm building, as I hand out things to kids, I'm building my notebook, and that's going to be my answer key, that when I do go through and grade their notebook, their digital notebook, that I know what pages I gave them and what information they needed to include with it. So it's a point of reference for when you go through that grading process and everything, just making sure that they had all of it. So it seems to work out, well. I don't know what it'll happen when I start to grade it the first time online. So we'll just see what happens there.
Yeah, I really like that. When I had mine, all their pages were just kind of separate. And so even though they kept building on it until the end, it was like them having to go back. And I like that it has a place to live while they continue to change and grow with it. I had one question that was earlier on. As you're putting the things in there, I know that we have students of all perspectives as they look at the slides, and also abilities for reading and interpreting the slides. So my question was, would you put a presentation and let them go through it and read them on their own, or would you record yourself discussing and talking about the presentation and have them watch it? How did that usually look, or is it kind of a mix of one or the other?
I haven't recorded, but that's one of the things that I want to do. So when I did it in the spring, all I did was I added or embedded questions that went along with it, just because I wanted to make sure and clarify that or giving them examples of how they could be making connections. And that was it was towards the end of the school year. It was in Unit 5, which was movement. And so then I also supplemented that with some projects. Part of it is immigration. So they had an opportunity to develop their own project about touring Ellis Island. And they had different points of interest that they had to write information about, so that I knew that they navigated all the way through the tour. So, but yeah, I do think that, to support some of our learners that may need that, I think that's a great idea, reading it aloud or interjecting. I think that's probably the biggest drawback on virtual learning or virtual teaching, is that you don't have that interaction with students where you can, on the spontaneity of the lesson, just have a jumping off point, because our discussions were so rich in the classroom, just from what kids' perspectives and what they see and those connections that they make. So that's one of the things I think about Giants, is that it's not a canned program. It's not something we're going to put a kid on a website and say, here you go, have at it. It really is teacher driven and teacher directed. And the goal is, in that sense, is to get kids to be more inquisitive and be more curious. We're not just spoon feeding them answers. We're trying to build those critical thinking skills. And that's where I think there's sometimes a disconnect, because there are people, there's some teachers that would just prefer to have a nice packaged curriculum that they can push out, and they can put on cruise control on that. But we're just trying to figure out how we can take what we've got and modify it. So if you have any suggestions, I know when I was in the classroom last year, we had kids with special needs. I even had a student that was visually impaired, and he did so much of the mapping activities. It was phenomenal. And so it just, it was trying to figure out how do you reach kids wherever they're at, and allow them to be able to grow and learn as they go, and definitely feel successful with it.
Well, then I'd say something about the presentations. That if you click on that button for the presentations on the WMISD site, it automatically downloads it to your hard drive. Because the presentations are too long, you should go through, delete the ones that you don't want it, put the word copy at the end of it, and then push it out for the students if you want.
Mm-hmm.
I would bet that there are probably 400 copies of those things floating around in 5 different states right now, which in various states of disarray. The other thing is, when you customize a map in the big clickable maps thing, you can take a screen capture of that and put it into your own presentations, or park it on top of a worksheet that you push out to the students. So you don't only have to do the way we did, where you direct them to it and then say, click on this button to see such and such. I mean, you can just grab it and put it out to them in whatever classroom management system you've got. That's why they're all put there as PDFs and basic DPTs, but the most portable file we could come up with.
No, and I think that's a good point with whatever anybody's doing, or as you talk with your colleagues, that whatever learning management system you're using, you're exactly correct. It can all be put in there. Is it a hassle to get it in there? Yes, but once it's done, it's done. And that makes me think of a question for the heavy Google Classroom users. If I remember correctly, you can have a co-teacher, and that co-teacher has editing rights, right? They can help you build that course. Okay, I'm getting a bobblehead. Okay, I thought so. I've spent some time in Google Classroom, but I haven't used it extensively with students like yourself. So, and that'd be a way to divide and conquer the task.
Mm-hmm.
We have designated, right now, I guess there's no others out there, but we had kind of designated that Becky and Andrea were going to be like your tech support guru for Google Classroom. And I was going to handle Canvas and Roy was going to handle the others, but we may not have any others because I know a few of my folks aren't here tonight and we're all Canvas up here. So if you end up with some questions about how to do those things, those will be your points of contact. And Roy, I'll text you some logistics, but if you get access to be able to build that course, I'll gladly jump in and help if Genesee can approve me for that, because it just makes sense. And none of our Canvas people are here tonight, I believe, but aside from Kathy, who's cheating. So,
No, it's not.
which is
cheating.
exactly
It's
what
called
I would have
working
done,
smart.
Kathy. So, kudos to you.
Is being sick and tired of mowing the lawn with a vacuum cleaner. That's what it is. I couldn't over and over ask to do it, and finally I just did what I needed to do to shut them up.
So we might send you guys a feedback form about the structure of tonight for the future network meetings, because we all want to make sure you guys are getting what you need to go forth and go out with that. So we might send you that, and we'll get you the dates for the remaining networks early next week. So you guys can get those on your calendar. And like I said, I will have the recap up tomorrow, and I'll work on the chunkier or the small chunks of recaps in line in the lesson plans if Carol and Andrea and Sharon will let me edit them. Anytime I've tried, I get really, really mean emails from Carol in particular. So, just kidding. So definite full recap tomorrow, bite-sized chunks coming in the next 2 weeks. By midweek next week, we'll have a feedback form on tonight and dates for future ones. Roy, Becky, what am I missing?
I don't think you're missing
I think-
anything.
Yeah, I don't either. I think you captured it. Well done.
Oh, I
And-
do want to add that, since we had originally planned on doing a network back in, February, March, when I had to turn in SCECH paperwork, because we had done that, folks who are participating in these networks can earn them if they need SCECHs, at no cost. So we're going to keep track, attendance wise, but we also will put that form in the folder that, we're using as a storage place, so that, if people want to do that, they can start accumulating hours.
And I'll actually add that to the email next week too, if you have the sketch form too. So you can get it from the folder or from the email. Well, unless there's anything else, I don't want to keep you guys at 7:31. You taught all day, and you've then listened to some really, really awesome presenters. So if you need anything in the interim, you've got all of our contact info, and go out, be successful, and breathe. You'll get through these first few weeks, and things will get easier as things go. And reach out to any of us if you need any assistance.